Hello, everybody, and welcome to week 3. Sorry for the delay on getting you all the podcast. I was having some issues with the software, so after reinstalling, we seem to be good. So hopefully you all will have a chance to listen to this today as you're getting started on your week 3 stuff. Hopefully you've already gone in and taken a look at what the week has in store. We are starting into Chapter 2, Biological Psychology. So again, here are your to-do lists for the week. And again, this is something that's suggested. This is the order that I would suggest everything be done in. But, everybody has their own style. Just don't make sure you don't miss anything, I guess is the important sort of take-home message. Things come quickly, especially with online classes. We're not meeting face-to-face, so I'm not having the opportunity to remind you of due dates as I would in class. So my only form of communication is with you here. So really I rely on everyone paying attention to important due dates. I usually try to indicate those in red, and I always reiterate those kinds of things on the podcast. So getting into Chapter 2, Biological Psych, here are your learning objectives. And you're probably noticing on the slides, on the lecture slides that I provide you, as you're going through the slides, you'll notice these objectives appearing on certain slides. So anytime a concept is covered on the lecture slides, there's also the objective that goes along with it. So it's kind of showing you, okay, here we're about to cover this. We're about to cover action potential, the role of the somatic and autonomic nervous systems. And so right away you're knowing what slides go with that. And this is great for helping you to streamline your reading as well, making sure you're picking up on all the key points as you're reading through the chapter. I can't reiterate enough with online classes how important the reading is. Some students like it because they like to just be able to read, go through the lecture slides and, retain the information and take the tests. Some students don't. Some students really prefer more interactive environment. So again, I know several of you, this is your first online class. It's kind of like a try it and see how you like it, but online classes rely a lot on reading, very heavy on reliance on the textbook and reading that information, integrating it with the lecture slides, which come from Pearson, and I tweak them a little bit and making sure that you're getting all the information that I want you to receive as though I were teaching it in class. So again, just want to make sure that you're realizing how to use these learning objectives to the best of your ability so that you know that you're getting all the material that you should be. But as you can see, if we kind of go through the list here, this chapter is dedicated to walking you through the body in detailed format, starting with the very smallest and essential component, which is a neuron. Sort of describing the functions of a neuron, the layout, what it looks like, all of its different jobs and such. So that's really important and really primary to your understanding. The second would be how a neuron communicates with other neurons. And this is where we get into the action potential as well as the job and role of neurotransmitters. They are the chemical and electrical messengers that use the neuron and the action potential to transmit their messages. So that if you're thinking something, it translates to which body part you want that to go along with, or even involuntary actions such as heartbeat and breathing that we don't think about. How does that all happen on its own? So it's going to get into that key kind of structure first, and then it's going to break down into the roles of the brain and spinal cord, which is your central nervous system, and then going into your peripheral nervous system, which is broken down into the somatic and autonomic nervous system. Now, because these are complex diagrammed different branches of the body. Here's where kind of drawing a little map might help in understanding what goes with what and what falls under what. There's a nice map in your textbook that outlines this, kind of like a tree, where you can see how everything relates to one another, but you're going to want to know, particularly as we get into the peripheral nervous system, how it further breaks down, and then the autonomic nervous system breaks down even further into the sympathetic and parasympathetic, each of those having their own functions. We talk a little bit more about the sympathetic nervous system, mainly because it's involved in a lot of activities that are related to stress, and some of the emotions that we experience during stress, related to hormones that get released during stressful periods, or periods where we want to activate the fight or flight response, would be related to that. So that kind of gets down into here. Then looking at, what tests do we use today to be able to study the brain, to be able to study these processes. So we're going to be looking at like MRIs, CAT scans, CTs, neuroimaging, and that really is the field of neuroscience, and that's where you're going to see the most cross-section of neuro with psych, and that's kind of like a neat field that has emerged over the last 15, 20 years, and we've learned a lot from it. So that gets into the detail of that. And then really the last half of the chapter is dedicated to parts of the brain. So once you understand sort of the minute neuro level things that are happening, then we start looking at actual structures of the brain and how different parts of the brain function differently depending upon what we're talking about. We'll see how emotions affect the brain when we're learning new material, or we're learning new activities or things that we're not familiar with. How does the brain process that? How does it store memories for those things, and what role does motivation play? We'll look at the cortex of the brain and just how different places on the cortex might indicate what we're doing, body parts that we're moving, language that we're using, our thought processes, and so forth. And then we can even break down the brain into the hemispheres, because even the hemispheres are sort of specialized in that the left and right hemisphere of the brain, they function differently. They have special functioning depending upon what area we're talking about. And then it wraps up talking a little bit about the applied aspect of understanding the brain in looking at things like attention deficit or hyperactivity disorder. I'm pretty sure the chapter also talks about things like Parkinson's disease when we're talking about neurotransmitters like dopamine, talks about multiple sclerosis, MS, depression, just a number of different illnesses that are affected either by chemical issues in the brain, faulty transmission of messages amongst neurotransmitters, what happens when we introduce drugs into our body, how does that affect our brain, as well as the impact of injuries on the brain, like a concussion or lesions in the brain. How might that affect us? So the chapter is jam-packed with stuff, and this tends to be one of the heavier chapters. Lots of terminology that students are usually not familiar with unless you've taken a bio class or a life science class that maybe you discuss some of this. So I would plan to spend a good deal of time on this chapter. Lots of repetition is going to help here. Reading the chapter through a few times, making note cards, and becoming familiar with some of the terminology specifically. And that's where my psych lab can be a big help too. So here are your lecture slides. I did put a PDF of chapter 2, only because some people had emailed about having issues still with the textbook, but I'm hoping now we're in week 3 that all those kinks are kind of worked out. And beyond this chapter 2, I will not be supplying PDFs of the chapters simply because that's a copyright issue. So hopefully we'll be all set. But there it is in case you need it. The videos that you're watching this week, again, are all in my psych lab, and they're in episode 3, biological psych, so pretty easy to find. And again, there's videos that deal with some of the neuroimaging techniques that are used, some hemispheric specialization between the left and right hemispheres is a video about that, split brain patients and how does that function, how do they operate, as well as some really great videos on neurotransmission. It's very detailed simulation showing you the action potential and how a message is transmitted from neuron to neuron. So please check those out. Really helpful, really going to help solidify all the components that I want you to be getting. Here's the Hawk reading. Again, I included it in case you don't have your text yet. It deals with the impact of experience on our brain. So it's reading number 2. So please check that out as it is linked to here. You can see discussion for week 3. My goal is to have your last week discussions graded by Tuesday, which would be, if you're listening to this Monday, that would be tomorrow. That's my goal, because I'd like you to have that feedback as you're going into writing your next discussion posts. I'd like you to know, what did I do wrong? What can I improve? Did I do everything right? So be looking for that feedback. Again, you would just click into the discussion thread. You would look at things you commented on and your original post, and you can see if I had any comments, if I had anything to say about what you wrote. And then you can also alternately go into my grades, which would be up here, and you could go to week 2 discussion and you could click on it, and it's going to give you any grade feedback that I had. So specific comments that only you can see that had to do with your posts. But I tend to post more in the thread of the discussion. So you're answering these 2 questions, and I might say something in response to what you wrote. Or if you commented on another student's post, I might say something in response to that. So you really got to be going back through the week 2 discussions and looking at that to see what I had to say. So this week's discussion, you're essentially answering these 2 questions. Please don't forget to be integrating in everything that you've learned. So not only should you be citing Hawk correctly, using this document here, Cite as You Write, and you can find that in the Start Here menu. Click here, you're going to go there and you'll see the Cite as You Write document. It's like 1 page, and it helps you to cite your sources as you're writing them correctly in APA format. So not only should you be focusing on that, but really trying to integrate in the main textbook, the Ciccarelli and White, getting in any concepts that are going to help to further support what you're saying in response to these questions. So please be trying to do that to the best of your ability. This week you do have another quiz as usual. And then we have the first exam, which covers chapters 1 and 2. So again, can't reiterate enough how important it is to have a backup option when you're taking these tests, so make sure you have a secure connection and everything's good. I would really recommend doing the My Psych Lab practice tests beforehand, before you dive in and take this test, just to make sure that you're ready for it, okay? So please let me know as the week kind of progresses if you have any questions about lecture material, about the book, about discussions, anything, please let me know. Otherwise, have a great week, everybody.